Sitaram and namaste to everyone, and a special welcome to our live audience. As we celebrate Diwali 2021 and amidst a global pandemic, the University of Trinidad and Tobago is pleased to present an academic discussion on Ramayan traditions and its impact in Trinidad and Tobago. The structure of today's webinar will begin with brief presentations by each panelist, followed by an interactive session where the panel will hear questions and comments from members of the public. Live viewers are encouraged to use the chat box on YouTube to send your questions in. Our first presenter is Professor Prakash Prasad, President of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Professor Prasad is a former head of the Department of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering at UE and has held the positions of Vice President, Research, Academic and Student Affairs, and Provost at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He was also the program leader for Design and Manufacturing Program. Professor Prasad is a licensed Hindu Pandit, spiritual leader of the Divya Ashram, and chairman of the board of Swaha. Today, he is simply Pandit Prakash Prasad. Ladies and gentlemen, members of our audience, Professor Prasad.
Thank you, Chairman, Mr. Ghanshyam Mohammed. Let me start by saying Sitaram and Shubh Diwali to all on behalf of UTT. And special, welcome to our distinguished panelists, Priya Bahan Geeta Vahini ji of the Kendra, President of the Hindu Prachar Kendra, Dr. Sharyan Singh, a lecturer at UWI in history. Is it senior lecturer, Sherry, or lecturer?
It's senior lecturer.
Oh, my apologies. Senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies. And Shri Rana Mohib, member of staff at the UTT and also an outstanding musician in his own right, well known to all. So again, Sitaram. I'm very happy to be able to speak a bit on the Ramayan traditions and its impact on TNT. And I will expand a bit with the permission of the panel and chairman briefly on this impact worldwide. So I think it's important we understand that it is a global village. Now, there are many dimensions to the traditions of Ramayana. And all of these dimensions will impact on the various aspects to which they relate to the dimensions. So for instance, singing style and traditions, and which Sri Ranaji will look at, so I won't talk about it, is there. It's a wide area. We have the rituals, the yagyas, etc., the singing of Ramayana, for the Shraddh Karam, etc. That is something again is there. Now we have the Ramayana singing, and I'm glad the panel is evenly balanced, because traditionally people would think that the Ramayana singers are mainly men. But they were in the past, they were really good women singers, right? And I know in my neighborhood there was one, Mrs. Raghu Maharaj. Forgive me, in my days, the younger days, you never knew older people's name. We knew the husband's name, and she is Mrs. Raghu Maharaj, but she was an excellent singer of Ramayana from El Socorro. That I can tell. So there are many aspects of that. Now, singing Ramayana is, like I say, it's something that up till now, when people listen to Ramayana, and if they will listen to Ramayana from small, it has a sort of calming effect on them. This idea, this sense of contentment, of quietude. Ramayana, the singing of Ramayana has an impact on people. And it will be worthwhile to say that one of the, in the past, best exponents of Ramayana singing was, Pandit Nirmal Maharaj, who made probably the first record, and up till now it's played. It would be remiss of me not to mention also my elder brother, the Paramacharya Swaha, Pandit Haridhar Prasad, who was well known. I mean, he sang Ramayana throughout the country and elsewhere also, and was known for that. So that Ramayana singing, it is part of the tradition, the impact on the practice of Hinduism, and keeping Hindus together through satsang. Now, Tulsidas Ramayana, the one we are accustomed to, written in Awadhi, and will be translated in Hindi or English, is a translation in Awadhi from the Valmiki Ramayana in Sanskrit. And during that time when Tulsidas was there, that India was under occupation by hostile forces, hostile to Hinduism. And it's, most historians, in fact, among other people, say that one of the reasons why that Hinduism survived in North India and flourished was due to Tulsidas Ji's Ramayana. There's no doubt about that. Similarly, when our ancestors came to Trinidad in a very hostile land, very hostile, and we hear, and this is something that we need to take up, that people are asking for reparations for the former slaves and the descendants, and rightly so. Nobody seemed to ask for reparations for the Hindu community, and I can speak for the Hindu community on what we have lost. This is tangible, and something must be looked at that. But anyway, that's a different issue. So, a similar situation, as I said, existed in Trinidad when our ancestors came here. Foreign land, difficult circumstances, difficult conditions. And what it is that kept them together? What caused Hindus to survive in this country? The Ramayana played no small part in it. Now, I know up to the 1950s or so, the Bhagavad Mahapuran was certainly more popular. All the yagyas were Bhagavad Mahapurans, yagyas. The Ramayana came in, 50s, 60s and back, and then became even more popular when you had musicians, playing for the Ramayana. So it became a lot more appealing and soothing, etc., to the audience. So the Ramayana was sung throughout Trinidad. Pandits did a wonderful job in that. And that kept Hinduism alive and kept it going. And in fact, I would be so bold to claim, and the historian can, dispatch it if required, that in the 1990s, that Hindus were in the doldrums. We were in a state of despair, dismay. It's as if we were totally, surrounded. And, how I imagine how Sita Mata felt in Lanka, in the Ashok Vatika. That's how Hindus were in Trinidad. And I can speak from experience. And this is history, doctor, is his story, right? So this is part of my story. I just came out of being, minority leader in the Senate. And outside, there was this palpable sense of dismay, of disappointment, of saying we have no way to go. The Hindu community felt totally lost. And at that point in time, right, we formed Swaha, right? It got incorporated in 1995, but we started in 1990 or so. And I remember, this caused a catalyst. The other, as I say, in Parliament, in the other place, I would say the other organization was moribund. And the formation of Swaha, and the facts would indicate that, caused them to shake off their comatose, situation and become active. And I think that helped to propel Hinduism, again, the cause of sort of rejuvenation of Hinduism, a revitalization of Hinduism in this country that goes forward. Sad to say, I get the impression, and this is my impression, that momentum seems to we seem to be losing that momentum now, that we have this revitalization. And I'll come back to that in a short while. So what I want to claim is that part of this, right, revitalization, the reason why Swaha was successful in being a catalyst in this, rejuvenation process of Hinduism was the fact that, two facts. One is that, like I say, Pandit Harade, the Paramacharya Swaha, and he was in Mahasabha, part of the Mahasabha fight back, answer back series to answer back. They had yagas to answer back on the conversions issues. He was part of that team there before we formed Swaha. So he was well known, and he had preaching the Ramayana, exposing the Ramayana to the population. That had an impact. And the other factor was that, which is part of what we call what I call the Ramayana virtues, which I'll expound in a bit. That the founder Swaha lived the life of what Ramayana is. When we say, people talk about the Ram Kahani, and Ram Kahani is meant to be a sad story, because Prabhu Shri Ram stood by his principles irrespective of the personal cost to him and his family. And this is something that we need to understand today, that you have to be truthful, you have to be honest, you have to be sincere as a leader. And I think he was that. I mean, if people criticize God, surely they can criticize him, and they have done so also. But the facts would indicate, like Ramayana talks about ek nari ek purush, one man, one woman. He lived that life. He always, talk about keep your word no matter what. He did that. And I think because of that sort of example, together with the singing of Pandit Haridev and other Pandits, right, that allows Swaha to be formed. And for the record, it should be known that no group really came from Trinidad to really start things up for 141 years before Swaha came. The other group, the other Sabha, was the dominant force. Nothing else seemed to grow. But that is, again, I guess we leave for historians of the future to deal with that. So this is how we started Swaha. And this is how I saw, like I said, the catalyst of the resurgence of Hinduism. And I want to draw a parallel again in India, that now that the Ram temple is being built in Ayodhya, his birthplace, you can palpably feel the emergence of Hinduism worldwide, because it's going to cause that again. And it's led by the Prime Minister himself, who is this sort of, who practices the virtues of the Ramayana. After all, Ramayan is Ramayan, the way of the Lord, Ram. And he is Madhyada Purushottam. He came to lead by example, by what he says and what he does. So that is a tradition of Ramayana, and that is going to have the biggest impact on anything that we go forward. So yes, the cultural aspects are absolutely important. The aspects of art, everything is important, social aspects, but the aspects of, the personality of Prabhu Shri Ram, the type of person he is and his characteristics, that is one to take us forward. And at this point, I want to use that to introduce the fact, as we go future now, that the impact is something that happens. But for impact to have real impact, it must continue in the future. If something is impactful only for a short while, then how can we say it is really impactful? So what is impactful must go to the future. And I think this is what we are lacking in Trinidad now. And I want to, again, use this word, make bold to say that all leaders in Trinidad, be they in politics, academia, business, religion, or hybrid of any of those, must demonstrate the values as stored by Prabhu Shri Ram to have impact on the Hindu society, to have impact. Otherwise, Ramayana will become, as we go on, and I hope, and I'm sure it wouldn't happen, but there's a movement towards that, where in India itself, people talk about Ramayana as myth. They won't dare say so about anything else. They have no physical evidence or DNA evidence of anything else started anywhere else. But they feel happy and they feel, they're comfortable saying Ramayana is myth. No, Ramayana is what kept Hindus alive and the values of Prabhu Shri Ram. So this is something as we go forward in life here. We want to ensure that for real impact, the lasting impact of the Ramayana, the values taught by Prabhu Shri Ram, who was a leader, who therefore was a politician, he was a king, but he never compromised his values. His values stayed inside and outside. Sometimes we take this Western point of view of compartmentalizing life. No, it's all right if I thief in private. In public, I won't thief. A thief is a thief. Simple as that. You can't compartmentalize yourself. And this is something that we're lacking. So people are saying, hey, and I want to give a personal example, and I crave indulgence. I'm coming to an end shortly. That when I was in the Senate, I remember I spoke to the clerk. I said, well, I'm a Pandit. She says, well, you never have a Pandits here, yeah? So I didn't know that. Because I was told a lot of people go and say, oh, they are Pandit. That's fine. I mean, the assumption of the title of Pandit apparently is one of the easier things to in Trinidad, yeah? So I said, well, yeah, but I'm a vegetarian. Can you please provide vegetarian food? Because I know a lot of people say, I don't eat that home, but I eat it outside. I mean, where is the value? You believe in something, you keep it. There's no need to hide. Be honest. Like I said, this is what Ramayana teaches about sincerity, about truthfulness. So the next week, the kind clerk who is still there says, yes, we, Pandit, we put, no, doctor, I should call it Pandit, Dr. Prasad. Then she says, I put the sandwich for you there. I said, good. When I went to the tea room, I saw the cheese sandwich on top of all the other sandwiches. So I said, thanks, but forgive me. I'm vegetarian. It needs to be put separately. And they did that the next week and kept it that way until, I left actually. I don't know if it has changed. I suspect it has changed after. No, the point is it's not about me. It is about the view of how people view Hindus and Hindu leaders who are supposed to embody the Ramayana, the virtues taught in the Ramayana. And I would end, that part by just saying this. When I was leaving, one of the gentlemen of the Northwest, a senator, said to me, who never praised me, always criticized me through my tenure there, says, Prakash, so you are the first decent Hindu I met, eh? I'm not saying what he said, eh? I'm not saying this is true, but that is how they think, how they see. So in conclusion, I want to say that sincerity, honesty in leadership, not hypocrisy, is what is going to take us forward. And I want to end by drawing the example of the distinguished Prime Minister of India, Shri Modi ji, who is a Hindu, who practices Hinduism. And when he met the most powerful man in the world, then President Obama, during Navratri time in the White House, he said to him, I'm fasting. So here is a guest of the most powerful man in the world and said, look, I'm a Hindu, I'm fasting, I won't eat here. No offense meant. He lived the life. And I really pray and hope that, and wish, and that our leaders, as I said, in all dimensions of leadership in this country, who profess to be Hindus, actually practice what the Ramayana says, because that's the essence of Hinduism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We go on straight on to our next panelist, Geeta Vahini. Geeta Vahini is the president of the Hindu Prachar Kendra, a position she took up in 2008 after completing a 4-year scholarship in Hindu studies at the Sudananda Ashram in Chennai and the Sankat Mochan Foundation, Tulsi Ghat, India. She teaches Hindu philosophy, heritage, practice through regular classes, courses, and satsangs at the Hindu Prachar Kendra. In 1990, she became the first woman in Trinidad to formally conduct a 7 nights Ramayana Yajna, and over the last 2 decades, she has emerged as a well-respected kathakar of Ramayana Katha. Geeta ji.
Thank you very much, Chairman Ghansham Mohammed. Sitaram to everyone, Sitaram to the esteemed panel. And I want to say that I am very happy to participate in this webinar of UTT to commemorate Diwali 2021 by looking at Ramayan traditions and its impact in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I have asked Ghansham just to share some images while I am doing my presentation. You'll see several photographs, and if there's something interesting that you might spot that you'd like to ask me about, you can certainly do that after, because I am actually exploring the impact of Ramayan traditions here in Trinidad by going to the place from where it all started. Now, I consider myself very fortunate to have lived there at Tulsi Ghat while studying. Now, Tulsi Ghat is the home of Sant Goswami Tulsidas, the author of the Ramayana or Ramcharitmanas. It's located at Assi in Varanasi. And while living at this place, Tulsi Ghat, Tulsidas Baba wrote several kans of the Ramcharitmanas or Ramayana, as well as Hanuman Chalisa and other compositions. He started Ram Leela there at Tulsi Ghat. It's still going on up till now. And he passed on at that very place. Now, it is also the home and the base of the Sankat Mochan Foundation. And the Sankat Mochan Mandir, it marks the life-changing moment for Sant Goswami Tulsidas because it is where he met Hanumanji. So I wanted to speak about this place and just share my experience there. Now, there are three locations or three places that I would like to mention and identify. One is Tulsi Ghat at Asi in Varanasi itself. The next is Chitrakoot, which is near to Sangam Prayag. And the next place is Ayodhya, the birthplace of Bhagwan Sri Rama. Now, Tulsidas himself was born in a district called Rajpur, which is not too far. Well, when you think of measurement, the way they measure distance in India, I just want to mention this. For us, any distance that is over 2 or 3 hours is considered to be very far. In India, these places that I am mentioning here, Chitrakoot, Sangam Prayag, Varanasi, Ayodhya, they are all like within 8 hours, maybe 10 hours maximum driving, and that will be considered to be a close distance in India. So from those regions, from districts in those places, many of our indentured ancestors came. Lucknow is actually like a hub, the center of this triangular region, if we want to, or we can say it like that, a triangle, right? So many of them came from there, and Bihar is near enough to Varanasi, very close to the border, the Uttar Pradesh border, UP border and Bihar. So Varanasi is very close to the border of Bihar. So the Ramayana and Tulsidas himself would have deeply impacted the lives of people in those areas, in those regions. And while living and staying there at the home of Tulsidas ji, I spent about 1.5 years there. I would say that there was no day that went by when I did not hear very early in the morning, and when I say early, this would be like from 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock, 4:30, going on to sunrise hours and even later into the mid-morning. People would just be coming through the gullies, going for their early morning bath, and they will just be chanting Ram, 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 and singing Ramayan Chaupais, and so that they would know from memory. So it is not surprising that when our Jahaji ancestors were brought here, we all know the history, I'm not getting into that, that the Ramayan and Sant Goswami Tulsidas himself had a tremendous impact on their lives. I would like to share a couple of the writings of the Hindu Prachar Kendra, the way Raviji, our founder, has described it, that they recreated a civilization from fragments of the Ramayana that were there in their memory, right? Now, up until the time when I was there at Tulsi Ghat, which is 2007, 2008, I encountered many bhaktas, Sri Rama bhaktas and Ramayana bhaktas, who knew the entire Ramayana by heart. They could just chant it by heart. And they would frequent places, they would frequent events where any form of Sri Ram Katha or worship of Sri Ram and Hanuman would be taking place. And Sankat Mochan Mandir and Tulsi Ghat, those two places were special places for such activities. There would be Akhand Ramayana. Akhand Ramayana means non-stop Ramayana on special days for special events. the attendance. I'm sharing these things so that you'll understand the energy that existed from the place and the spaces from where our ancestors came. So the attendance at Ram Leela for me was mind-boggling. And you would see very small children, and they will just sit and sing and chant, and you'll see very old people also who would have grown up their whole lives in this tradition, Sri Rama tradition, Ramayana tradition, Ram Leela tradition, who would have been so intimate with knowledge of Sant Goswami Tulsidas. So it was a mind-boggling experience. And then the bhav and the style of chanting, and Ranaji will deal more about this. It was so invigorating, and it was one that I easily identified with. It's what we might call like just singing Sada Ramayana with the tal and percussion. It's very much like the genre of the Jal Ramayan, very invigorating and very vibrant. And the bhaktas who would be there, they will be immersed wholeheartedly with reverence. Sometimes you'd be there and people will just be passing by, doing their shopping, doing their chores. They will come and they will just stop and they'll be able to join and participate. So there was formality and there was informality as well. So it is from such experiences and ethos that our Jahaji ancestors came or were brought to this region. And I am sharing this small poetic piece that we have at the Hindu Prachar Kendra from one of our special compositions. Tulsi ji ki Ram kahani crossed the Kala Pani with Jahaji in their memory. Chanting Chaupai, they planted Ketari. For the Jahajis in the Caribbean, Sri Ram didn't have to come again as man. He sent Tulsi ji ki Ramayan. So this captures the mood and the essence and the whole experience of the Jahajis as they crossed, as they lived through oppression and suffering, and even when they faced death, so much so that up until now, we still chant Shri Ram Nam Satya Hai when someone has passed and we are going to the smashan. So that was the energy, that was the vibration, that is what existed at that time, centuries ago. And it is what still exists up till now to nurture and to support people who still live there in the very way it supported our Jahajis, and in the same way it's continuing to support all of us. Now I want to share a thought with you. It was actually in the year 1988, that's more than 3 decades ago, when I was a young student at the Hindu Prachar Kendra's Hindu missionary course. And I heard the term colonial Ravan for the very first time. It was during a class with Raviji, and it was in the month of May, the month we observe in our Indian Heritage Month. And in the classes that followed, there was a fascinating comparison that was explored and shared with us students on Sri Rama's exile and the Jahaji exile, because both Sri Rama and our Jahajis, they were uprooted from their homeland. Both faced atrocities. Both were barefooted. They were barefooted in their own type of banwas. And it is from Sri Rama and the Ramayana Katha that they drew inspiration to endure and to overcome. Furthermore, Tulsidas's own life, and we were talking earlier among the panelists, I wanted to share a little bit more about Tulsidas Baba, because we focus a lot on the text, but we need to understand about the experience of the life of the author also to, I think, fully appreciate the whole experience of Ramayana and Ram Katha. So Tulsidas's own life was one of ongoing struggle, great tragedy from the time of birth up until his writing in Awadhi, the vernacular of the people, to his own illness and difficulty. So his life was not an easy life, very much like the life of the Jahajis. So what emerged from both these connections defined the Jahaji way of life and what we have inherited as the Ramayan tradition and by extension our Hindu culture and life here in Trinidad, because Sri Rama's life and his encounters as a human being, it's sublimated into their own life, into the life of the Jahajis. So what we have inherited as a Ramayan tradition, it is rooted in all of this. Now, we have often at the Hindu Prachar Kendra said two things, that Trinidad is Ramayan country, right? And Sant Goswami Tulsidas is the father of the Hindu Caribbean. And we have consciously said this because of the role the text has played in the life of our Hajis and in what we have inherited. And I can attest to the fact that Ramayana remains, and I'm sharing my personal experience here again, the most popular text up to this day. As to how as to how this emerged and how this came to be, I'm not getting into that. And why I'm saying this, it's every week we have a virtual satsang during lockdown, right? And while we knew this and we have spoken about it and said it many times before, I was now getting like a direct experience of this, because every single week we get numerous requests for more Ramayan kathas in our satsangs. And we try to facilitate this as much as possible. But the requests come again and again for Ramayan kathas because the Ramayan tradition, the different styles, the kathas are so well known that people identify so closely with it. They just enjoy listening to it for inspiration again and again. So this is as much as I will share on my personal experience on what has probably been the foundation of the traditions that we have received. And also Professor Pandit Prakash Prasad mentioned, very important is for us to look to the future to see what is going to drive and take our Ramayan tradition forward. And I want to say that at the Kendra, for almost 3 decades or more, we have been exploring and experimenting with singing our Ramayan Chaupais in the original Awadhi and also translating it in verse in English. And this has been a tradition that has emerged that is working for young people and younger children, because they learn so much quicker, and I share this honestly and sincerely because it's what we have seen. And also, while there in India, I have also had the opportunity to share these writings with the Mahant at the Tulsi Ghat, those who are the seniors there, and it has been really a fascinating experience. They were just shocked, almost like our own version of rewriting, as Tulsi Das ji translated from the Sanskrit to the language of the people. We here have been trying to do the same thing. Our language is English. It's the language we use to communicate. We are not all fluent in Hindi, so we are doing our own experimenting and exploring. And so far, I can say it has been working very well in our community. So I thank you all for this opportunity and extend a Shubh Diwali to everyone. Sitaram.
Thank you, Gita ji. Just a reminder to the live audience on YouTube, you're free to send in your questions via the YouTube chat box. Our next presenter is Dr. Sharyan Singh. Dr. Sharyan Singh is a lecturer of Indian Diaspora Studies and Indian History in the Department of History, University of the West Indies. She specializes in social, religious, and cultural transformations among Indians in Trinidad and the Caribbean, in Hinduism and the Ramayana tradition in the Indian diaspora, and on the Indian indenture system. She has held fellowships at the Center for Study of Culture and Society in Bangalore, India, and at the University of Warwick. She's currently the head of Department of History at the University of the West Indies. Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Ghansham. Sitaram, namaste, everybody. Let me start off by saying thank you to UTT and to Professor Prasad for asking me or inviting me to participate in this forum. I do definitely think that we need more forums such as these, whether in the context of Diwali or outside of the Diwali context. We've heard from Professor Prasad and Shri Gita Vahini on the Ramayana. So today what I'm going to try to do is to complement what has been said so far and look at a bit on the historical dimension. I was quite happy to hear Gita ji talk about the local Ramayana tradition, because that is what the idea that I promote, that we in Trinidad and the wider Caribbean, we do have what we can call a Caribbean or Trinidad Ramayana tradition that borrows from or pulls from the Ramayana tradition or traditions in India, especially the Ramcharitmanas. But we have included in it now our own nuances and so forth. And this tradition has gone beyond simply the written facet of the Ramayana and has manifested itself in so many different dimensions, which is what I will get into today. So a little bit on the history, and then we'll look at the various dimensions. So just to start off saying that around more than 88% of the indentured laborers who came to Trinidad were Hindus. They practiced various aspects of Hinduism, but most of them were drawn from the Uttar Pradesh and Bihar regions. And those regions, as Gita ji just explained, those regions were deeply immersed in the ethos of Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas. So that alone in itself would account for the Ramcharitmanas very quickly becoming a social, religious, cultural, and emotional anchor for the early indentured laborers in Trinidad and the wider Caribbean, but essentially in an alien and often hostile environment for the indentured laborers. There are many points of appeal, and Gita ji touched on some of them, that of the Ramayana that would appeal specifically to people in the Indian diaspora, especially in the indentured diaspora. Foremost would be that, in the Ramayana, you had this theme of exile. Sri Ram was exiled and he went back to Ayodhya after his 14 years. And indentured laborers drew solace from that idea because they saw themselves initially as being in a sort of exile, and they looked to the Ramayana and to how Ram dealt with his exile. And of course, they nursed the idea of one day returning back to India. The Ramayana also, it's, when you look at it, you look at all the nuances and the ideas and the themes, but it is essentially a rather uncomplicated story in that sense, because you have a clearly established line between good and evil. And in the context of Indian indenture and early post-indenture efforts at building community, this clear dichotomy, as you call it, between good and evil or good and bad, made it simpler or easier for the indentured laborers to use the Ramayana as a reference point in rebuilding community. So stories from the Ramayana, characters from the Ramayana, the values and morals and so on would be brought to bear on the construction of community, both during the indenture period and after the indenture period. Stories from the Ramayana also impacted on the Hindu and sometimes even non-Hindu perceptions of the new environment, to the extent that, and we'll talk about this a bit more later on, that many elements of the unknown or potentially threatening agents, such as the white colonial oppressors, were often referred to as Ravan. As I said, we'll talk about this Ravan element a bit later on. To get into the dimensions of this Ramayana tradition, initially there were two main dimensions, and those were related to the textile sphere. So you had what was the more formal Yagna forum, and then the more popularly engaged in forum known as satsangs. Now, from the early indenture period, even on the estates, you had the indentured laborers would come together after a long day's work, and these stories are there in official reports. They would come together, sit under a tree or sit by the stairs of one of the barrack houses, and they would actually sing verses from the Ramayana. And of course, these verses would be done via memory, by heart, as Gitaji said. Sometimes, they might have a jal, a small jal, or they might have a small dholak, and sometimes they wouldn't have any music at all. So it will be done in the sadharan style. This practice of coming together, whether daily after work or once a week or twice a week, it was carried over at the end of indentureship. So as the Indians moved off the plantations, and remember, Indians would not simply be moving off when indentureship ended from, let's say, 1917 or 1920. Indians would move off as early as the 1850s. Maybe you had people who came in, let's say, 1845, completing their 10-year period, they would leave. So community reconstruction started to take place substantially from about the 1880s. And you saw now in these efforts at community reconstruction, the Ramayana became very, very central. So that these sessions of coming together to chant, they were carried over. So sometimes you would have weekly chantings, you would have twice a week, sometimes even more. By the 1930s, what started happening in these newly emerging communities, you had a new space being created, a formal space being created for Ramayana chanting and other religious events. And these were in the forms of small mandirs or temples, and they were often called kutiyas. So these kutiyas provided the first formal setting for satsangs within the Trinidad context. So as I said, sometimes for once a fortnight, once a week. And then as communities started to become more and more cemented, more and more events would be observed, more and more religious events would be observed, both at these kutiyas and in the homes. So let's say by the 1940s, 50s or so, the idea of having a monthly full moon katha would be performed at many of these kutiyas, and accompanying the actual puja would be readings from the Ramayana. Then as people, they became more and more economically sound, and they could actually afford it. You had pujas being done. I remember growing up in the village, almost every home, once you could afford it, you would have a weekend starting from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, where various pujas would be done, and Ramayana reading would often be part of that occasion. Various occasions, apart from pujas, would also have readings from the Ramayana. A lot of the times, the death of an individual would also occasion readings from the Ramcharitmanas. From very early on, post-indenture, even indenture period, people would often engage in a sort of what you call quid pro quo kind of arrangement with the divine, where promises would be made, let's say regarding if you wanted something daily, for example, in situations of illness, you pray for recovery, wanting a successful agricultural season, your child's academic achievement much later on. So people would make these promises, and it's like if you achieve these things, then they will have a satsang, or less frequently a yagna. In terms of yagnas, as Professor Prasad said, Ramayana yagnas overtook the pre-existing Bhagavad Puran and Bhagavats, as they were called, by around the late 1960s, 1970s for a variety of reasons. People, because of the oil boom, people, they could actually afford to do these Ramayana yagnas. And of course, the Ramayana was written in Avadi, translated in Hindi, and it could be, it could be sung to music more easily and readily than the Bhagavad Puran. So a lot of factors went into the Ramayana superseding almost the Bhagavad Puran in terms of yagnas. And as people became, people could more and more afford individual Ramayana yagnas or yagnas on the whole. What there was existing before was the Panchauti Yagna, where communities would come together, pool their resources and organize a yagna because not everybody could have their own. So as people started to be able to afford their own yagnas, the Panchauti Yagna would see a decline gradually. In terms of the knowledge of the Ramayana, from as soon as you had the communities emerging after the Indian indenture period, let's say 1920s, late 1920s, each of these communities, when they set up their mandirs or their kutiyas, many of them would have what we call a pathshala. They would set up a pathshala, and these could be translated as, local village schools at these mandirs or kutiyas, where children, Hindu children, would be taught scriptural knowledge. They would be taught singing of bhajans. They would be taught Hindi also. And of course, the Ramayana would feature in there. So knowledge, the transfer of knowledge of the Ramayana before the 1970s was done via the pathshalas. So the popular situations would be where all the children would go. They would be taught Hindi by a village elder, a sadhu, or sometimes even a pandit, time permitting. And this was where you had the initial transfer of knowledge, first of all Hindi, and then of course reading and interpreting of the Ramayana. Later on, much later on, you would have, and I saw this report being done in the Port of Spain Gazette, so that's during, let's say, 1938, you did have competitions being organized. So these were more sporadic, not very consistent. So the Sanatana Dharma Board of Control in Trinidad, they organized competitions in Ramayana chanting, Ramayana-related poetry, bhajan singing, dialogues, and essay writing. And this echoes probably what would come later on in the form of the Bal Vikas competition, starting in 1986. Which, comprise, many elements of Ramayana. So you have Ramayana study quizzes and singing competitions and so forth. I think it's Professor Prasad touched on the fact that, there were many female Ramayana readers, especially there weren't many, especially up to, let's say, as late as the 1970s. And one thing I want to say, I don't think I can get into a lot of detail, but when we look at the Ramayana and the changes that have taken place in all facets of it, whether in terms of women, whether in terms of the type of music, whether in terms of the type of tune, whether in terms of how regularly you would have these satsangs or the formats of these satsangs, we have to remember that the changes do not just occur in a vacuum. They are reflective of changes in the larger society. So in that way, the Ramayana tradition is very much alive because it reflects social change. And it's like a symbiotic relationship where changes in the Ramayana reflect social change, and social change would generate changes in the Ramayana tradition to a certain extent. I'll get into the dimensions of the Ramayana tradition now. So you had the textual tradition in two forms, main forms, the yagna and satsang. And then, of course, the most long-standing of all the dimensions of the Ramayana traditions, apart from the textual, would be the Ram Leela performance. And the earliest one was done in 1888 in Dow Village, California. So much can be said about the Ram Leela. I will simply say that it served as a very effective means of incorporating uniquely Trinidadian issues and elements into the Ramayana tradition. And the most popular motif for doing this has been the effigy, or that figure of Ravan that was burnt on the last day of the Ram Leela. Now, from the very early period, from the colonial period, Ravan was used as a way, as a means, and as a voice of Hindus to display, or if not or verbally say, but to demonstrate their discomfort or their dislike of certain elements. So in the colonial period, their point of aggravation would definitely be the colonial authorities. So very early on, you had Ravan figures being dressed like the overseers in their khaki pants and the hats and so on. So when the Ravan was burnt, Hindus would be saying something via that Ravan about colonialism. Fast forward into the post-colonial period, pre-independence period throughout the Caribbean, the independence period, you had that use of the Rawan continued. So in Trinidad, there were Rawans during, let's say, the 1960s, even the 70s, that were dressed up, covertly and overtly, like Dr. Eric Williams. So you would have the Rawans wearing the dark glasses and the hearing aids. And, this was the Hindu way of, voicing their opinion of that particular individual and the party that he was affiliated with. In Guyana, it was similar, where the Rawan would be dressed as Burnham, and Indians would be saying something when they burned the Rawan figure. Okay, and more recently, you actually had Rawan, and I actually saw one in Felicity, where the Rawan was wearing a Nike earring. And when I asked why is the Rawan wearing a Nike earring, they said that, it is to show their opinion of the negative impact of Western elements on Trinidad society. So the Rawan figure has definitely been used as a voice or an agency for the Hindu community throughout the period of indentureship and beyond. So that's the Ram Leela. In addition to the Ram Leela, the Ramayana tradition also encompassed films. So from the entrance of Hindi films in the 1930s, you had a number of movies based on the Ramayana being brought into Trinidad. Yes, these were not produced in Trinidad, but they became a very important part of the Ramayana in Trinidad, because for the very first time, Hindus could actually see, they could actually, have a visual of what they were reading of, what they sang, what they held so dear to them. And I remember, going with my grandparents to look at these movies, and my great grandmother, she would literally be sitting in a position of reverence with her hands clasped throughout the entire movie. And when Ramanand Sagar brought the Ramayana to life in his television serial in the late 1980s, a lot of the older people would behave in the same way. So, for us, it would be, okay, it's simply the Ramayana on TV or the Ramayana as a film. But for this older generation, their lives were so imbued with the Ramayana that they could not make that separation, for the Ramayana at all. Whenever anything about the Ramayana was said or heard or seen, it carried with it that reverence. There were also been in Trinidad now several versions of the Ramayana, written versions aimed at children, done exclusively for children. So you had like abridged prose narratives and comic books, which have been circulated from the 1970s. During the 1990s, several attempts were made by a local publishing company to present, stories from the Ramayana in the form of coloring books and storybooks. Also for younger children, you had Ramayana-related crossword puzzles and word sleuths and so on. Scenes and tales from the Ramayana were also depicted in dance and dance dramas by both local companies and visiting dance companies from India. So for example, in 1992, the Shankar Kala Kendra, they did a totally local production of the Ramayana ballet, and that was praised as being one of the most detailed versions of the Ramayana ever staged in Trinidad. The National Council of Indian Culture went on to facilitate a number of Indian ballet companies' dance and dance drama productions of the Ramayana in Trinidad at its annual Divali Nagar celebration. However, in addition to these more formal dramatic performances or stage performance, there was also a more formal dance drama known as the Sarwan Kumar or Shravan Kumar performance. And until as late as the 1980s or maybe in the early 90s, you had this Sarwan Kumar or Shravan Kumar performance being done sometimes at what we call cooking nights for weddings and other contexts. And this Shravan Kumar dance drama also provided an avenue for a voice for Hindus about certain problems of daily life. So these issues will be incorporated into the dance drama. And of course, we know that Shravan Kumar, it's a story taken from the Ramayana. You have various art forms also constituting part of this Ramayana tradition. So for example, scenes from the Ramayana have been done as murals on public and private mandirs and temples, and at also various socio-religious events. We have our local murti making tradition, and of course, paintings of various sizes of individuals from the Ramayana. An interview done by one of these murti makers, it simply reaffirms the sanctity that enshrouds the entire Ramayana tradition, because she said, when making the murti of Sri Ram, that itself is a worship, it is a sadhana for her. Okay, and then you also have other smaller handiworks that would depict scenes from the Ramayana. You have pottery, you have like wind chimes and so forth. Trinidadian writers, not Indians, but not exclusively Indians, have also contributed another dimension to this Ramayana tradition by working into their novels and short stories and poetry, various aspects and images and functions of the Ramayana. So, for example, in C. Prasad Naipaul's The Adventures of Gurudeva, his main character attempts to become a pandit, first of all, a teetotaler. And in order to do this, he starts chanting Hari Ram over and over. He writes the name of Ram on his mandir wall, and he starts reading the Ramayana. In Lakshmi Prasad's novel, Butterfly in the Wind, she emphasizes the role that the interpretation of the Ramayana plays in the formation of morals and values, and refers to the idea that brides should be like Rama's Sita. In another novel done by Haral Soniladu, he makes ample reference to the entire abduction image involving Ram, Sita, and Ravan. And as I said, local poetry also mirrored the Ramayana. For example, Derek Walcott used the Ramayana story in poems such as Exile and The Sadhu of Kuva. Another aspect of the local Ramayana tradition has to do with the naming of individuals. And that is almost telling you something that all of you know already. But nevertheless, many of the characters in the Ramayana, their names are given to people's children. So we have Ram, we have Sita, we have Lakshman, we have Hanuman, we have Dashrath, we have Sumitra, we have Kausalya. But understandably enough, most individuals refrain from naming their children after individuals such as Kaikeyi, Ravan, or Manthara. One person who I actually interviewed, he recalled having known a classmate when he was in primary school by the name of Kaikeyi. And whenever she displayed any bad behavior in school, the teachers would tell her that she was simply living up to her name. Life cycle rituals, our major life cycle rituals, such as birth, marriage, and death, they also contribute to this Ramayana tradition in Trinidad. Until the 1970s, a very vital aspect of what we call the Chatti or Barahi ceremonies, the 6th and 12th day birth rituals, a very important facet of this was the singing of songs to celebrate the birth of the baby. And this would be done by women, and they would be singing and beating their dholak, a bottle and spoon, lotan with a spoon or coin, etc., and a majira. But they would use stories about the birth of Ram, or they will sing songs about the birth of Ram to celebrate the birth of this baby. But of course, this tradition would die, let's say, by the late 1980s, because now people were having, hospital births and so on. So you had a clash in terms of the post-delivery practices, in terms of when they went to the hospital or before. The Ramayana's impact on the Hindu wedding ceremony has been more substantial and enduring. While there has been no direct reading from the text during Hindu wedding ceremonies, during the discourse, whether formal or informal discourse during the ceremony, you do have often very, very elaborate descriptions of the wedding, of the marriage of Ram and Sita. And oftentimes the officiating Pandit, he would emphasize the divine couple Ram and Sita as role models for the newlyweds. Sometimes too, there might be verses verses recited from the Ramcharitmanas to cement this idea of Ram and Sita being the ideal or a role model for the newlyweds. The Ramayan's presence in death ceremonies and rituals definitely have existed since the beginning of Indian Hindu presence in Trinidad, but they have changed over time. So until the late 1960s, when most funerals, the processions would be done on foot, whether to a ceremony and later on to the various cremation sites. While during these processions on foot, people would actually be singing verses from the Ramayana during the processions to the various sites. However, from about the 1980s, when the foot procession was being superseded now by largely vehicle procession, this dynamic change. So what generated this change was that by the 1980s or late 1970s, you had designated cremation sites. Cremation was finally legalized, which is a whole long story. So people now had to go, let's say, to the Caroni River site. They also the Mosquito Creek site. So designated sites, and those trips could not be done by foot. They were very difficult. So now you had vehicle processions, and of course the use of a hearse. So now you would have initially, let's say from the 1980s, the verses of the Ramayana being played just inside of the hearse, and a little bit later on they would use what we would call a mic. So the music now inside of the hearse would be amplified, and a few years later they would have a car following with a mic where verses of the Ramayana would now accompany the funeral procession. Then, in addition to the funeral procession, for many people, for about 10 to 14 days following the death of the individual, Ramayana satsangs are held, until all of the post cremation ceremonies are done. And these satsangs definitely would bring a lot of solace and comfort to the bereaved family, in two ways. One, you have a gathering of people who would help the family through this very difficult time. And two, you had the verses of the Ramayana being sung, which in themselves bring comfort and solace to people. In addition to these very enduring dimensions of the Ramayana, you had a number of less enduring manifestations that contributed to the Ramayana tradition, and these would happen, from the 1990s. So, for example, in 1996, you had a Ramayana Utsav. You had a number of Ramayana Yatras, Ramayana chanting marathons and conferences. From 1995, the Divali Nagar organized its Nagar around the theme, This Ramayana Country. Then the Hindu Prachar Kendra introduced their annual Mantra Vimochan, Mantra of the Year, where issues of community and national importance were highlighted. And Ramayana would often feature there. And then in 1997, on Tulsidas's 500th birth anniversary, it was celebrated where a 108-night Ramayana reading marathon was performed. So you did have, in addition to the more enduring elements of the Ramayana tradition, these more sporadic ones. I'm coming to the end, so I will just take a few minutes to say that the Ramayana functioned and has functioned as a doctrine. It provides ethics and morals and values on many levels. It does that for Hindu family life by providing models in the forms of the characters of the Ramayana. It provided from very earlier on a sanctioning rule where people, similar to how, the Muslims would use the Quran and the Christians would use their Bibles. The Ramayana was used either a physical Ramayana or the idea of the Ramayana would be used to sanction promises and so forth, or in the taking of oaths. And this would occur very frequently at the panchayats, when the panchayats would have their meetings and would have what we'd call cases and so forth. Professor Prasad touched on politics, so we can talk about that later on. I just want to say that Ramayana has always played a very important role in the reconstruction of Hindu political life and in leadership in Trinidad. Obviously, until about the 1980s, it was this was done more within the community. But, as we started having more Hindus in the taking part in national political life of the country, and the Ramayana would now make that move from internal Indian or Hindu politics to the national politics of the community. And of course, there could not be a transplanting of the ideals of, let's say, Ram Rajya into national politics. What you did have was the adopting of some elements or the main ideas of Ram Rajya. For example, Ram's ideal portrayal of kingship, of leadership, issues of loyalty, functions of ministers, political harmony, the primacy of state and subjects, and so forth. So all of these elements in terms of politics were eventually fused into the national political life of Trinidad and Tobago, especially when we had our first Hindu prime minister. So I will just conclude by saying that, it is evident that in addition to the textual aspects of the Ramayana, there has developed a larger Ramayana tradition. It is connected to the textual, that's the nucleus of this Ramayana tradition, but you have different facets such as dance, drama, literature, etc. And they were all conditioned in some way or the other by the experiences of Hindus in Trinidad. And as I started by saying, I'll end, that the relationship between the Ramayana and the Ramayana tradition and the larger Hindu society is a symbiotic one, where one influences the other and also reflects the other, and vice versa. Thank you, Sitaram.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for a very enlightening presentation. Our next speaker is Sri Rana Mohip. Rana Mohip was born in Trinidad and Tobago and began playing harmonium and singing at the age of 9, and is today one of Trinidad's leading musicians. In 1987, he received a scholarship to pursue Hindustani classical music in India and began initial training at the Gandharva Mahavidyalaya. While in India, Ranaji performed at many prestigious music festivals and was featured regularly on All India Radio. He also had the honor of performing alongside many renowned artists of India, including Pandit Jasraj, Pandit Rajan and Sajan Mishra, Sri Madhub Mudgal, Anup Jalota, and Hariom Shara. Rana is a senior instructor of Indian classical music at the Academy for the Performing Arts at UTT. Before I allow Rana to begin, just please let us take in a very brief clip from His Holiness Paramacharya of Swaha, Pandit Hardev Prasad. One moment.
Holy Sri Jal Ramachandra ki jai. Dear viewers, the Ramayana Katha has been sung, or Ramayana has been sung over the years since the arrival of our ancestors from India. Way back in the past, the practice was to sing Ramayana just as it is called Sadharan Ramayana. Some people say Sadha Ramayana. More than 50 years ago, I'm speaking about. So satsang used to be held and pandits would read just like that. You would have villagers, elders also reading. No music. Absolutely no music. As a matter of fact, to some people, music was what they termed to be haram, that is forbidden. They believed that music would take away from devotions. So many years, way back in the past, satsang was done just like that. Of course, after a while, you will realize it became quite boring. I myself, being subjected to that, would find a quiet corner to sleep while satsang was in progress. With the passing of time, then music was introduced. We had, some pandits, not very many, just one or two of them, who had their own groups. And coming to mind, I reflect upon recordings that were done, as we call them LPs that were done by two pandits really, Pandit Prasad Mishra, and of course the late Pandit and the late Pandit Nirmal Maharaj. An LP was also done by Mr. Balkisun. Now, otherwise, hardly ever you will hear Ramayana beat with music. There was one Pandit otherwise who I'm familiar with, who I'm aware of, the Pandit Param Narayan. He also used music to do his Ramayana. Of course, it was very attractive doing music with Ramayana, Ramayana with music. You'll find a lot of people gravitated towards it. They love the singing, and of course, the stories were there, but it's so beautiful to put music together. So with the passing of time, music, well, it became the norm, but at that point in time I'm speaking about, I can speak for myself. When I began to read Ramayana, I might be one of the very first few Pandits who started to read Ramayana playing his own harmonium. The other Pandits, they had a group playing together with them and they would just sing. But we practiced ourselves and we got into singing bhajans and so on, and we put Ramayana to it. So the music came in, Ramayana came in together with music. We play our own harmonium and we sang. And way back in the past, I can't remember how many years ago, when you'll find that the late Pandit Nirmal Maharaj and Pandit Param, not to say they faded away, but with the passing of time, everything becomes different. Then there was another point in time that I kind of picked up and it became popular, singing Ramayana in this way. And if I may add, I was the very first Pandit who maybe had a group accompanying me in the sense of cursing while Ramayana was in progress. The other Pandits, they did all the singing song by themselves. So just to mention the dynamism of the whole thing, and changes took place. Now way back in the past, the tunes, as we call them, that the Pandits used to sing, we took the very same tunes and put them to music. And so I'll present some of the tunes that we used to sing and we still sing up to now. With the passing of time, a lot of cinema song tunes, as we say, came into Ramayana. And, with people studying music in a classical perspective, they began to do it in more classical ragas and so on. But what I'm presenting to you is what we would have done from way back in the past, approximately 50 years ago, coming this week. So I'm going to present some of these chaupais that we sang originally. And many people up to now who have been exposed to these would realize that when you hear this, you feel like you're hearing Ramayana. You feel like you're hearing Ramayana. When you hear Ramayana in other tunes, you're not too sure it's Ramayana you're hearing. It may sound nice, but the feeling of Ramayana that was here way back in the past comes through these wonderful tunes that have been preserved over the years. And to be honest with you, even up to now, I may perhaps put a tune or two in cinema song fashion, but the original orthodox tunes, as we call them, nothing can replace them. So here goes. I begin with Adoha.
Balaji.
Thank you very much, Ghanshyam. And thank you to the University of Trinidad and Tobago for organizing this webinar and to be part of such an esteemed panel. Okay, so as Pandit Hardevji mentioned in his introduction, probably around 50 years ago or so, they had what is called Sadharan Ramayana, where there was no music. They just, also I think Dr. Singh mentioned where they will just sit under a tree and chant the holy pages of the Ramayana, etc. And really and truly, it was Pandit Nirmal Maharaj, as mentioned both by Professor Prasad and Pandit Hardevji, who really started, I would say, the music in terms of putting the music into the Ramayana. Now, I was fortunate enough to learn in India, and in my studies in India, I've realized that the Ramayana tunes or the melodies that we use here basically are the same melodies that they use in India, most of them. And over the years, it has evolved. And as Panditji also mentioned just now, we have now people singing the Bollywood songs, the melodies of the Bollywood songs, and just putting the lyrics towards that, just to attract the youths in terms of getting them much more involved in spiritual activities, etc. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take the most popular Ramayana tune or the most popular Ramayana melody and give you a little breakdown in terms of its development. And as we said, when we have Pandit Nirmal Ramayana, as Panditji said just now, you feel like you're hearing Ramayana because there are certain melodies that once you hear that, you know that is Ramayana basically. So the most popular Chaupai melody is one that is based in Rag Desh. And luckily I have my harmonium here, so I'm going to just give you a little introduction to Rag Desh and the notation of that particular Chaupai. So Rag Desh is a melody. Re ma pa re ma pa ni da pa da ma ga re ga ni sa re ma pa ni sa re ni da pa da ma ga re ga ni sa. So that melody which I was talking about is the most popular one. I'll just sing the notation, and I'm sure once you hear the melody of it, everybody will be able to relate Ramayana to this. Pa ni ni sa sa re ni da pa ni da pa ma ga ri sa ni sa re ga ma pa ga ma ga ri sa ni sa re ga ma pa ni da pa ma ga ri ni sa re ga ma pa ga ma ga ri sa ni da ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ni da ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ni sa sa ni da pa ni da pa ma ga ri ni sa re ga ma pa da ma ga ri sa ni sa. So I'm sure once you hear this melody, the first thing that comes to your mind is Ramayana, right? And if I just put one of the chaupais, Mangala Bhavana Amangala Adi Rahu Dashrath Achara Bihari Sri Ram Jaya Rama Jaya Jaya Rama Jaya Rama Sri Rama Jaya Jaya Rama Jaya Rama Sri Rama Jaya Jaya Rama Sri Rama Jaya Rama Jaya Jaya Rama. So basically what I did, I showed you first of all the notation. When you're learning to sing in India, first thing, before you could actually learn the words of the song or the words of the composition, you must be able to sing the notes. So this is how I have learned, and I thought I'd share this because it's all about educating. All right, so what I'll do now, I'll take a very popular doha, the melody of a doha. And this particular melody is in a rag by the name of Rag Bhairavi. Sa ma pa da pa ni da ma ni sa da pa ga sa re ga ma ni sa pa 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 ma dha pa da pa ma ga ma pa da pa ni da ni pa da pa ma ga ma pa da pa 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 da ma 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 ga ga ri ri sa ni ni sa ri ga ri sa 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 ni sa sa ga ri sa sa sa. So from the Hanuman Chalisa, this simple doha. Sri Guru Charan Saroj Raj Nij Man Mukur Sudar Rama Nij Man Mukur Sudar Varno Raghuvar Vimal Jasu Jodayak Parchar Siyavar Ramchandra Ji Jai Shri Shankar Hari Om Jai Jai Shri Ram. So basically, this is one of the most popular melodies there is in terms of the dohas in your mind. So one of the aspects that many of you spoke about earlier is the Jal Ramayan. So I know that in our audience, many people probably was wondering, what is that Jal Ramayan? So basically, Jal is an instrument which is actually cymbals. It is not as small as a manjira, which is a smaller cymbal, and not as big as a tasa jal, right? But it's like a medium-sized cymbal that they use, and it's also used during the holy period when they sing Chautal. All right, so I'll demonstrate to you through a video that I found where this particular group from Pinal, led by Mr. Ramuta, I think, they performed the Jal Ramayan. So I'll just share my screen. Exactly, put it up. Right. Right, so I just thought that this is one of the traditions in Ramayan, the Jal Ramayan, that is actually dying. We have very few groups in Trinidad who perform this type of this Ramayan. So I just thought I'd share that with you. So with this, I've come to the end of my presentation as well. Thank you very much once again for the opportunity. Sitaram. Ghanshyamji.
Thank you very much, Rana. Hand you over now to Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Ghanshyamji. Well, we have had four different perspectives and presentations on the Ramayana, but definitely when you put all four together, you get, a very holistic view of the Ramayana. We've had Professor Prasad talking about his experience as a practitioner for so long, and definitely giving us some insights into the world of some peaks, I would say, into the world of politics, and also in terms of his views and in terms of the way forward. Then we have Geeta Ji also giving us her insights as practitioner, definitely taking us to the world of Tulsidas. And, it is quite important for us to understand the author of the Ramcharitmanas, whatever book or whatever text we're looking at, it will always help us to better understand the text if we can understand the author better. So definitely Geeta Ji, I'm sure many of us, we've learned a lot new things about Tulsidas from your presentation. And then I gave a historical perspective in terms of the development of various facets of the Ramayana, the tradition. And then Rana Ji just presented us with this really enchanting, his singing and his depictions of the tunes, the more popular tunes of the Ramayana. They definitely took me back to a certain point in time. So I will just start off our little discussion until if there are any questions we have to field from the audience. So I will just remind the live audience that, you're free to send in your questions while we are engaging in our little, our own discussions. So Professor Prasad, you you touched on the issue of, the politics and, you were, almost, kind of prefacing what you said, but, you're speaking bluntly, and I like that. So tell me, do you think today that, the politics of the Ramayana can be or has been applied to our local context?
Well, it can be. Unfortunately, it is not. People think, politics is the art of the possible. So I ask the question, why can't it be possible to do the right thing? There's a saying that managers do the things correctly, but leaders do the right thing. All right. So this is what I find. My experience. I mean, I've been in academia, I've been in politics, right? I've been NGO organizations, etc. Right. And whilst I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but some of the more high-profile ones, and they're not all bad. I want to say this thing as a Hindu. I don't believe the dichotomy either Ram or Ravan. Hinduism says you have your three gunas, so you have good qualities and bad qualities in you. So I want to make that very clear. But what I find particularly disappointing is that Hindus don't stand up for their beliefs, particularly leaders, and this redounds politically. I mean, and you in Trinidad, you're speaking bluntly. You go to North Trinidad, and in particular Northwest Trinidad, the view of Hindus, and I don't need to say it, you know it, right? Everybody would know it. And it doesn't come across only because the British said so. And the British did say so, right? About their own particular interpretation of what Hindus are. But they have seen it live in Trinidad, that the leaders are not consistent, right? They're not open and they're not sincere about their beliefs, and that is something like that. That's why I think that Prime Minister Modi is such an extraordinary character. How many leaders, Hindu leaders in India itself? I mean, one famous Prime Minister said, "Call me a jackass, but don't call me a Hindu." And you know who that is, right? So this is the problem. If Hindus are to continue, I mean, I know Hinduism was a rural religion initially, and still by, I mean, when it says that it's national, it tend to be rural. But we live in a cosmopolitan world now. And to say that Ramayana, is either, and I won't be too long again, right? It's too black and white, right? That is not true. You see, in science, we say, and I'm an engineer, I trained in science. So numbers don't make sense, in other words, whatever analysis you do. So you must refer back, you can't create matter, you can't create energy. So to the Ramayana, the basics, the fundamentals are there. You need to apply it. And I'm saying that what happened in Trinidad and in India to worldwide, that in this need for acceptance, right? We have gone over in the Ramayana and said, I don't like the Ramayana, it's too straightforward. I use the Bhagavad Gita, right? The Bhagavad Gita, but Gandhi, in which the first phrase in the Bhagavad Gita, the whole, then Bhagavan says, stand and fight. Even if it's your family, if it costs your life. The great man managed to turn that on his head and said, don't fight. All right. So, I mean, so I'll end by saying this then, that, in science, you take a spring, you pull it, any system oscillates up, down, overshoot, undershoot. So we have gone from trying to live the firm life of the Ramayana, the life of sacrifice, sincerity, to a life of, hey, let us model things around, say all sorts, make all sorts of excuses, and say, we follow the Bhagavad Gita, which is not so. Bhagavan was very clear about that. So it was an attempt to show that how you can, using the basic truths, look at the situation and arrive at solutions. That's what Hinduism is about. It's not dogmatic, it's not prescriptive. It gives you the basics and you use your brain to find out. So I think the bottom line is that we need at all levels genuine, sincere, truthful leadership at all levels.
Geeta ji, as a leader of a Hindu organization, how do you see, values and ideas and ideologies about Hindu leadership in the Ramayana being applied? Can it be applied now?
Thank you very much for that question, Sherry, because I was actually going to just make a comment after Pandit Prasad, because I am sharing what is our practical working experience at the Hindu Prachar Kendra. So I'm not talking about something that I don't know, but about something that I have, that we are involved in and that we are seeing working. Now, we all desire this type of ideal leadership. And we want people to apply certain values or a type of lifestyle that they don't even know. So there is this measure or level of ignorance of the tradition. Of course, some people know it, but they can't show it or do it, like Duryodhan, that we often quote, I know the dharma, but I can't do it. And I know what is a dharma, and I can't stop myself from doing it. So that's the human condition. So we started a 30-year project to grow the next generation of leaders and adults. Now, this type of work is not attractive. It struggles to get support, but it is very critical work to do, because the changes that we want to see, it's not going to happen with and through the adults who are already there. We have to grow it and nurture it from small. So this is why we took on this heritage and service learning project during all the school vacation holidays and on weekends when possible, because we juggle with the academic schedules of children also and the young adults. We have half of that program is already over. So we are in the 17th or 18th year of something that we took on for 30 years. So by the time 30 years comes, we have children who have been through this program of training, of civil responsibility and all of that. They will be 25, 30, 35-year-olds who can hopefully fulfill and serve this type of leadership wherever they go and wherever they find themselves, in the kind of way our community and our nation and our world needs it. So this is where we are at the Hindu Prachar Kendra. I think we have to to grow it and nurture it through the generation that is upcoming right now. So that's my comment on that. But yes, really terrible issues with leadership, and that leading by example also, it is such an important thing. And I think this is why Sri Rama himself, he is the ideal, as we said, the Maryada Purushottam Ram, because he led and he taught by example. He lived it, so we human beings can identify with it, his own struggle and how to overcome the sacrifice that is involved. No one can be a true leader in a sense without self-sacrifice. You know, those of us who are there working, it is a real struggle and it is very demanding. So if you're not willing to, I mean, I'm speaking as a female also, all the things that we have to juggle. So we have to be there, in serving, to recognize the importance of doing it honestly, as Panditji has been saying, sincerely, and managing through all the struggles and the self-sacrifice that's required. But for leadership to change, it's not going to happen. We are saying with those who are there right now, we have to grow it and nurture it. So that's where we are.
Okay, so hopefully within the next decade, we should be
We're
seeing a new
hoping,
crop of
yes,
young
yes.
leaders.
Yes,
Huh?
but you know, a lot of the, sorry, Sherry, a lot of the young adults who are there now, like 20, they've entered university between age 20, 25 and so on, at high school and so on, they are the youth leaders in their school, the school prefects. They are taking on the projects to organize Ram Leela, and what they are emerging as natural leaders in their villages and communities and in their various mandirs and so on, because I'm talking about children who are not only from the Hindu Prachar Kendra, they come from various villages and areas around Central and also from different groups. So they are also showing that leadership quality emerging in their own spaces.
And I think that is absolutely necessary, because I remember even in my generation, and I suspect your generation also, you know, Indian children tended to be more, you know, they wouldn't come to the fore. You know, it presented with a particular situation with, let's say, Indian, Hindu, a mix of children. You know, you would hardly find them coming to the fore. You would hardly find them emerging as leaders, you know, not wanting to take certain initiatives and so on. So I definitely think that what you're doing is absolutely necessary, you know, to break that, you know, pseudo mold, if we want to call it.
Yes, and I think that has changed also, Sherry, because these children are so confident. You know, long ago when we were smaller, we'd be afraid to even be in front of a microphone or in front of people to speak and to talk or to say anything. But they are emerging as confident children, proud of their Hindu identity and so on.
Right.
And we really have to know, that it continues. You know, the thing is, of course, some may get lost by the wayside, but if you have a group of 100 and 10, 15, 20 of them emerge, that's still quite successful. It's better than where we are at right now, you know.
Yes, exactly.
Madam Moderator, I don't mean to prolong this, but I just wanted to ask, I want to compliment the Prachar Kendra for doing that's wonderful, right? And that is leadership training, right? But what I was referring specifically was character. Character. And I think character is formed and formulated at the home. You grow up listening to Ramayana and you know you cannot tell a lie. You must respect your father and mother. You must, listen to your brothers. This sort of thing. What I'm saying, that is character building as opposed to leadership. You may be the biggest unleader and have character, and you may be the biggest leader and have no character. And I think this is what I'm talking about, the issue, right? And forgive me, I won't say anything after. I really am puzzled, because I think that the formulation of this sort is a Hindu homes, when the parents themselves don't know, or a lot of them don't know. They don't expose their children properly to that. And that is what, from small is ingrained in you, becomes part of you, it is impossible for you to do other than that. And that is the issue. So it's character trait and the Ramayana in building character. And it can't be at school or at the temple. It has to be at the home. The equivalent analogy we're trying to let teachers make children better. They can't do that. The teachers are not parents. They may help. And that's the problem we face in Trinidad in a larger context. But in the Hindu situation, so I want to compliment, Gita Bahin on that. But I think what we all need to do collectively is to ensure that Hindus and the parents in particular, and we can't get all, but whatever percentage we can get, live the life and make sure at the home level that kind of character is instilled in children. Sorry for being, I'm passionate about this.
Absolutely.
I seek your forgiveness.
Yes, no, I do agree. The home definitely plays an important part. I see we have two questions, so I will just throw them out to the panel. One of the questions is, they said, can you discuss the challenges about conducting Ramayana Yagnas during the pandemic and its limitations of performing the many accompanying rituals and community? So I will ask the two practitioners that we have, basically the person wants to know, how can we manage conducting Ramayana Yagnas during the pandemic and perform the, the rituals and having congregations and so on. How do we do that? Can we do that?
I think Gita Bahin can speak. She was speaking about it. I will just comment afterwards.
So the thing is, we are all, of course, aware of the adjustments that we have to make because of this pandemic. It's no secret at all. And we are finding ways of doing that. Now, sometimes people do have a concern that critical things that are important features of Yagya or Hindu way of life, that we have to omit it, or we have to adjust and we have to adapt, and it may not be correct. There is this sense that is out there sometimes. But we are taught in our tradition about Desha Kal Paristiti Pravaha. We have to adjust and function according to our place, our space, our time, and our condition, right? Look at us here right now. Under normal circumstances, this webinar would have been happening in a different format, right? We have technology that we can use to still ensure that we can get all the things that we are accustomed to doing, and that of course includes Ramayana Yagya. There's so many different social media platforms, and someone was saying, well, I don't know how to use it. Every grandparent has a grandchild or a son or a daughter or someone who can help to just put on the technology for them to be able to view and to see. So we can still continue to experience and to have yagyas and satsangs with all the necessary features at a location, as we have been doing since the pandemic started. We have not missed a Sunday morning satsang. I can use that example, right? When it was just 5 of us, we functioned with 5 people, somebody behind the camera, somebody on the audio, and just 3 persons. So we have to follow the rules and guidelines, and we can make it possible and we can make it work. So we have not missed a Sunday because we are following the rules and we have to adjust, but everything can still get done. We are not missing any of the rituals. We are not missing the pujas. More and more people are actually able, this is our experience, to be able to be a part of what is happening. So much so, Panditji, that I have people now, and I'm sharing this very honestly, who are telling me, Geeta ji, I am so enjoying this being at home. I don't think I'll be coming on Sunday morning. So that's also the risk. There is a risk, right, Panditji? So we get into a kind of comfort zone, and that for me is the risk. But it's something we have to consider because people are feeling safer in their homes. I will not say that it is laziness. I will not say that. I will just say that people are feeling more secure. They are comfortable. They are still able to enjoy and experience what they are accustomed to and being a part of. Of course, it's not the same. The energy and all of that, it's not the same like actually being in a space. But we have to give some consideration to the audience that we may lose in this whole process, the congregation that we may lose who are just happy to be at home. So this is as much as I will say about this, but everything can indeed still go on, adjusted and adapted as necessary. So Panditji?
Let me just give a quick, a different point of view. Now, my temple in Prasad, Swahadeva Ashram, I've conducted in the last year and a half 2 services, face to face, right? Now, I mean, other members of Swaha actually doing this thing online. So I speak for myself. I don't like it. I don't see it being useful, right? I'm not saying it's not useful at all for me, right? But what I want to preface that, to put that in the context, that over the years, I've told people all the time, I'm not praying for you. I'm praying with you. And whatever we have put this in place, I'm saying, in fact, when you do offerings, I tell them a month, you say it, you offer, I'm not offering for you. So the idea is in the larger context that you must take care of it, you must pray also. And therefore, my thing to them when the pandemic came, hey, you have done all these things, we are giving this thing for the time being, pray home now. Pray on your own, it's good to develop yourself. So that is the context. I'm not saying, the online thing, because other members of Swaha do it, but it's my own personal opinion. I feel satsang, I must be in there in the temple, feel and energy, etc. And you're right, I think we're going to have a big fallout after this pandemic, that people will not see the necessity to come to the temple. And therefore we become, I don't want to say disorganized, but even less organized. I stop there. And the last thing I wanted to say, about doing things, maybe this forum, as a historian yourself, Dr. Singh, that we approached, in fact, I had approached the Mahasabha about a month and a half ago, and said to them, hey, let's stop this thing. We are here to stay as you are. Let's stop this apparent, dispute between us, all right? Let's get together and work together. And in fact, Raviji also got the Kendra and all the Hindu groups for the first time, I believe genuinely we got together and signed up for open air cremation. To date, it hasn't happened. And like I said, if the Hindu community was organized, we should have put a stop to that. There was no response to the letter. Swaha wrote individually, Mahasabha wrote individually, other groups so. And this is what I'm talking about, getting together and move, Hindu, the sort of influence you have in society. We need to do that. And this is something that needs to be done. So maybe as a historian, the sort of difficulties we had. So maybe the next webinar should be, why the devil do they let us, cremate and stop enriching the funeral homeowners?
Yeah, because you're right. We've gone down that road before in the fight for, making cremation legal in the first place. That took us what? The discussions on that started since the 1920s, and it's just late 1970s that it was fully legalized. So hopefully this issue is not going to drag on, because it's an infringement on a fundamental Hindu right and ritual. So, I think the group should definitely continue pushing, with this.
Been trampled on for the last month or 2 months or 3. That's what I'm saying. This is what I talk about, and this activism is part of the Ramayana, to stand up and be, whoever is against it, you stand up and say, I don't care whether you're president, emperor, whoever, we say this is this is our right. And our religion so empowers us.
Yes, to fight for the right and the freedom to practice it, definitely. Rana ji, just getting your opinion. I know you told me that you weren't a Ramayana practitioner, but I know that you teach music. So I'm supposing that you would have been conducting classes before the pandemic. How are you managing to conduct your classes? Or are you managing?
Well, yes, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have gone online as well, virtual. And it's not the same amount of students that we will regularly have because of challenges of Wi-Fi and other connectivity and other things. But it has been going on. I will say maybe there's like a 50% fall off right now, being face-to-face and going virtual. But we are also hoping that maybe in the near future, we may be able to go back. But some of the students are so comfortable at home that they're also saying, so can we, if we go face to face, can we also have virtual? So this is one of the challenges, like the temples, like also classes on the whole will definitely have. Yes.
Yes, definitely. I can see that happening, because what is at risk, as Gita ji so said, it's the whole community element where you actually come together and interact with people, that human element. And, if people get so comfortable, whether with music or yagnas or satsang, then what happens to that human interface, which is so fundamental,
Yes, it is.
So we'll have to kind of strike some kind of balance.
Dr. Singh, I just want to make a quick comment. It's just a lighter note, actually. When Ranaji was presenting the most popular Chaupai tune, I remember
Yes.
when I just started, maybe just after 2-3 years of doing Ramayana Katha, I had gone to a satsang, and Ranaji, I had not sung that tune. And someone called Raviji and told him that I did not sing any Ramayana Chaupai because I did not use that
Yeah, but
tune. So
that's
I
it.
said,
It's the most
yes,
identifiable
yes,
melody.
it was an elderly
Yes.
gentleman, and he called Raviji to complain and say, what kind of training is that I did not sing any chaupai, but I said I was singing Ramayana Katha. So when you were doing the tune, I remember that. So now I
Yeah.
make it a point every time I must do one of the very traditional tunes. So I thought I'd just share that, as one of my experience with the musical, the melodies.
Yes,
The older people definitely have, their ideas. They grew up with certain ideas like the tunes and whether music should be involved and so forth. So it's difficult to wean them away from that. So I think you're using the correct approach, Gita ji. You
The
make sure you
balance of
have that
both.
older, yes, the old
Make
and
sure you
the
have
new.
that melody there. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
So I make
sure.
sure.
Yes. So we have another question. It has asked to develop on the colonial Ravan. Gita ji, we both touched on it, so you want to just kind
Yes.
of,
So this idea of the colonial Ravan, of course Ravan is the tyrant, the Rakshas to be conquered and defeated by Sri Rama in the Ramayana. He was the oppressor. He was the kidnapper, of Sita. So the British was viewed at that time as the colonial Ravan, the one who had, in a way, kidnapped the people, brought them away from their homeland to a place of intense suffering, as Sita Mata would have been suffering in the Ashok Vatika in Lanka. He was the oppressor, and Ravan did that in disguise. So I think that idea of the disguise of Ravan, the way he went in disguise, masked, not revealing his true self, who he is, the intention. What was the intention? There was no sincerity of intention. All of these converge into the idea of the colonial Ravan and the British Empire at that time, about what they were leading people to in the guise of that Ravan garb, and uprooting the people, kidnapping the people, however it happened, right? But the Jahajis found themselves in this strange land, in a kind of Lanka place where Lanka was the golden city. So we are accustomed hearing to the streets were paved with gold, and life will be so easy, and the wealth that would come and all of that. But that was not the circumstance. So this is the idea of the colonial Ravan. It is about the British Empire and how it functioned to recruit and to bring the people here, and about the oppression that took place here, and about the willpower of the Jahajis to stand up, as we have been talking about so much, to stand up in the face of the British Empire, like a Siuda Sadhu would have done. So all of these are the ideas that are embedded in this concept of colonial Ravan.
Mhm. Yeah, so definitely there are a lot of parallels can be drawn between, the Ramayana, various aspects, the Ravan especially, and this whole indentureship and then engagement with colonialism. Because just as you, to draw on the point that you used, the recruitment process, there was a lot of deception. There were lies and so forth, similar to what Ravan employed. And then, of course, there was physical kidnapping of women a lot of the times has happened. So definitely a lot of parallels that we can look at when we talk about this colonial Ravan. Just a reminder, we have about 10 minutes again, so I'll remind the live audience if you have any final questions. We have one more here. And the question, it says, does the Ramayana encourage the Caribbean Hindu to speak to more progressive opinions on topics such as politics, racism, LGBT issues? Many of these issues are affecting the young Hindus and are still being swept under the carpet. Panditji, I see you ready to answer.
No, I mean, fine. I think the thing about it is that I think you have to distinguish between what the Ramayana says and society. Right? I mean, today you still have the people, Dalits, etc., in India who have been, and other people, or a variety of names, right? When Prabhu Shri Ram spoke of Shabari Mata, he said, none of these things matter to me, right? But it's there. So what I'm saying, I think now I'll have to accept, I didn't accept it before, what you're referring to about the Ramayana as ideal leadership. But I would say in some of these social issues, all right, the Ramayana provides an ideal that society falls far from. So, he had no this, remember when he was leaving, I guess it was transgender, transgressors, whatever you call them, they stayed outside of Judea for the period of his exile. Eh? That's why up to today, as the anecdote goes, they allowed a special day in the year to, cross-dress and walk around, etc., without any harassment. Eh? So the Ramayana, there was no racism. The fact that he, when you look at it, he Hanumanji, all right, and Sugriv, and Angad, and Jamwant, right? Now, who do we call monkeys and stuff like that these days? So that's blatant racism in society that has no place in the Ramayana. So my thing, I mean, I'll be frank again, I am a so-called left-leaning Pandit. Right, I'm not this conservative traditional type that I'm. If you want to use a Christian analogy, I believe in Hindu activism, social activism, which I do think is very popular. In fact, when we way back in over 2001 or 2, when we explained in India, and one of these Pravasi, there was what I was doing, the comment was made: "You fellows are the Hindus, you are Catholics." So I do think it's part of the Hindu social fabric. And there's a big divergence in that fabric from what the Ramayana preaches. So in Ramayana, there's no discrimination. I think there should be none. And by saying, if God is supreme, he created all, who are we to say we know better than him, that these people bad or not good, etc.? Nonsense. So in final analysis, there's a huge divergence. Ramayana encourages that, but it's not being practiced.
And just to add, I mean, definitely, I mean, in terms of politics, the Ramayana gives you the idea that utopian state of Ram Rajya. I mean, that runs deeply into the politics. So it presents this state of Ram Rajya. So of course it will encourage, the engagement with politics. In terms of the issue of LGBT, we have to remember, as Prof said, that issue of transgender and so forth, this is nothing new to Indian civilization.
Asian.
Okay, it is being presented as new and, from a Western perspective. We've had those issues and people of those orientations as part of Indian civilization for thousands of years. So it has been there. And, as Prof also said, if we want to take away something from the Ramayana, you look at how Sri Ram dealt with Shivari. She was of the lowest caste. So there was no discrimination based on caste, on skin color, on hair color, hair texture, or anything, no discrimination. It was the idea of acceptance, and all that was necessary within the context of the Ramayana was devotion and love of Sri Ram. Nothing more, absolutely nothing more.
But these things that have crept into Hinduism are for the monotheistic religions. They're not from Hinduism. And unfortunately, even the concept of karma, how we understand is what other people said, what monotheistic practitioners said. So Hinduism has been corrupted. Whereas what we need to do, the Ramayana needs to clear this out. There's nothing like that in the Ramayana. So these are outside influences that we need to not sweep under the carpet, sweep out totally.
Geetaji, anything you would like to add to this particular question?
I was just going to share, but I'm so enjoying this, I have to say, because it's taking my mind all over the different spaces and experiences that I was fortunate to have. And this is while staying at Tulsi Ghat. For the large, there's a huge collective Ram Leela that takes place. And Panditji, on the night of for the Karadushan army, when the army is coming towards the forest, right? You have all the villagers and so on who converge and they take on different personas. So again, that idea of the disguise. So I was sitting there with the Mahanji and some of the other administrators, and my husband Krishna was there also. But leading the entourage of that entire Sena of Karandushan were the transgenders. And they come and they are dancing and they are skilled and they are given due honor and reverence. So they came before Mahanji and they started dancing and he gave them dan, he gave them dakshina. Then they came to Krishna and started dancing and we had nothing to give and they would not go away. So then Mahanji had to say, okay, that's enough. But they are treated in something so sacred, like the Ram Leela, they have a place, and they have value. So this idea of discriminating, because of gender or caste or whatever is someone's inclination, it's not there, And for me, it was a fascinating experience. Even going in the train one day, we were with one of our Acharyajis and they came through the train, Ranaji. I don't know if you've ever experienced this at all, Ranaji. But they were coming through the train, the different bogies, the coaches, and they were singing and people were there giving them a few rupees and all of that. And they were treated with respect and they moved on, So really it is something that has always been a part of our civilization and a part of our world, to respect each and every one and to not discriminate the way, as Panditji is saying, for the monotheistic traditions and so on. It really doesn't belong to our world. So, and it's important for us to have these conversations.
Definitely.
Because,
Yes, Geetaji, I totally agree with you, because even living in India, with the eunuchs coming and being part of society, it's like a norm, and everybody treats them with dignity, etc. So traveling in a train, you experience that every time. So it's something that we need to be able to appreciate and give people their value, basically.
I think what we need to do generally is to move away, but that will take, knowledge and active education of people. Move away from almost pigeonholing Hinduism or looking at Hinduism through a Western lens, So, things that now, for example, and I appreciate the question, but, it's an example of, not knowing that Hinduism, you have space. This has been part of the civilization. So when you take this Western perspective, that's now dealing with issues that refuse to deal with these issues for so many centuries, and now it seems like a big thing, but this is something that has been part of Indian tradition for so long. So, not because, let's say, any issues with LGBT is not in the Ramayana, that doesn't mean to say that Indian civilization didn't engage it. At that point in time, in the Ramayana context, the story, so to speak, did not call for that, as it didn't call for many other issues. So we really needed to generally move away from looking at Hinduism through a Western lens on all different levels. And we have one final question. The question says, given the precedent of Goswami Tulsidas translating the Ramcharitmanas from Sanskrit to Hindi, is there time now in Trinidad to move to more English on the Singhasana? Practitioners?
Well, that's already happening by us. We're already engaging that. I mean, even the way we tell kathas, Panditji, we are singing the original Awadhi. Our commentary is largely and mostly in English. And of course, we do have Hindi, Bhojpuriized words and phrases that we still retain. And like I mentioned before, we have gone a little further to compose songs and small verses in English on the chaupais, theme chaupais for each katha, theme chaupais or verses for each satsang. So I think that's the way we have to go right now. And these are the changes that we were talking about, that future changes that may come. We don't compromise on the values, but the expression may take on a different form, you know, without compromising the values. So I would say that we are already there at our institution and doing that. And I think also there are other groups and organizations, because it is the style right now that is adopted by most.
I will give a slightly different view, right? And I hope Rana don't think I'm transgressing on his musical stuff, right? But when we look, you know, I started by saying that why we should not be, you know, paid for reparations for loss of culture, right? Now, I did learn Hindi informally. Now I'm learning Hindi formally, all right? Which is a bit different, yeah? And in terms of sound, in terms of stressing, right? In terms of a variety of things, I think that this is just my view. I'm not reflecting anybody's view, right? As far as view, right? Right? That I think we'll be losing something. Now, I'm not saying not to go ahead and sing a few songs in English, right? Because why we do that? But we do just songs for Indian Arrival Day, songs in Hindi and English, right? And in fact, I've been encouraging them to do all in Hindi. Let's learn. But the pronunciation, the songs, the feeling it evokes of hearing the Hindi words is totally different. I mean, how you pronounce the words, how the words sound. I mean, the same thing like saying a harmonium could be identical, a keyboard could be identical to a harmonium. It is not. The sound of a harmonium, right, is an envelope of sounds. So what I'm saying, so Rana, forgive me. I mean, I learned my music through science.
No, Prof. I totally understand. But you know, now they have keyboards with the identical harmonium tones. So.
Well, I think we agree to disagree there, right?
But I also don't think that it has to be identical. You know, this is what I'm saying.
Right.
The form, it's like the virtual satsang. It's not the same, yes. It's certainly not the same like being there and being in the mandir and feeling the vibes and all of that. But we also have to understand what is going to work for now.
And the English, English translation, I think we need to strike a balance. All right. I think we cannot give up the culture totally. And like I said, other than the technical reasons, and Rana, you are the expert musicians, and we are doing research in UTT on robot music and these sort of things. We're looking at a variety of things, right? And that I think we can show it very clearly. Right, that you know that even the rhythm in English is different from the right.
Yes, it is.
No, it's different. What I'm saying, so I think if we go that way, totally, I'm not saying right. I mean, English translation again is fine, but we'll be losing part of our cultural inheritance. And then you want a practical reason. Well, now that's China kind of stumbling. Probably the next superpower is India. Yeah? Maybe it behoves people to learn Hindi. Yeah? So I will end there.
Yeah, I think my view on it is that you know, we shouldn't lose the authentic Hindi words, the Avadi, etc. But the transliteration should be there so that you know the regular person can interact and understand what's happening.
But not to pronounce this, Rana, right? When your people read transliteration, their pronunciation is so different. To pronounce the word properly, you need to say the Hindi. I mean, I look at transliteration and look at the Hindi words. I don't like transliteration. The Hindi word tells you how to pronounce it. The transliteration is not up to now standardized. right? And then the different types of pronunciation that you get is not there. So I mean,
And,
so
and
at
then
least,
too, there are certain Hindi words that there's no English equivalent to it also.
That's
So
right. So yes, Gita ji, put the English, explain, have some things, right? But I think we must keep. There cannot be nothing like what Trinidad Ramayana. That'd be like English. It sounds, British like Hindi English. It sounds very ridiculous, at least to me. Do like the French, incorporate it in the language. So I think Indians seem to feel, and I really am going on too long. They seem to think if you talk English, you're sophisticated. We need to get over that, man. All right, we have an ancient culture that's very old and very magnificent. Let's keep it.
Panditji, I was just going to say, like, I think we understand and appreciate that concern, right? So what we have developed, and again, I'm sharing our experience because we are looking at what are the fallouts also when we try to introduce something new. So we have developed a vocabulary, right? That of about almost 400 words, right? Important critical words, Hindi words that we have been teaching to the children who come to the to our courses and the programs and so on. So there's still some retention of the language, and I think those of us who are the teachers, we must know the language, right? We must be able to read it, and understand it and pronounce properly. But really, we do have an issue with pronunciation. This is why I think we very consciously started developing that vocabulary, of puja words, kitchen words, practical, daily, everyday words, Ramayan words, and so on. So that is like a teaching tool that we use there with our children. So we are conscious of this also, that we don't want to lose the rasa of the language. So
yeah, I do think that we need to strike a balance, because for me personally, I don't believe that the actual verses of the Ramayana can be fully captured in English. You can't, not the transliteration, not the translation. So as you say, but we have to adjust, because we live in a society where 99% of the people do not understand Hindi, cannot read or write Hindi. What do? Do we say, okay, we just leave it in Hindi? So guess what happens? The interest will die down. So from the time of indenture, Tulsidas even did it. He wanted to bring, the Ramayana, Valmiki's Ramayana, to the masses, so he translated it into the language. And I am sure things would have been lost along the way, translating from Sanskrit to Hindi. So, we need to strike that balance where we retain the essence, but we can include English. And I believe that, a good way, not a perfect way, is that and it will take a lot of effort. So you retain your Awadhi, you have your transliteration as best as you can of the Awadhi. The ideal would be a practitioner who can read Hindi also, not simply English, so that practitioner does not make the mistake of mispronouncing words. That for me is not acceptable. If you're a practitioner, then you should know the language. Yeah. But of course, you have the translation and the transliteration in English to be able to reach the audience, the young people, and whoever. So there has to be a nice balance between, the old and the new, the traditional, and, reaching out to keep the interest alive in terms of the Ramayana tradition and the text and so forth. Yeah. Any final thoughts or words from anybody? I think we should wrap up now. Anything before?
No.
All right.
On behalf
Yes,
of UTT, thank you all very much. I think this has been a very enlightening, interesting, right? And as you pointed out, we should do a bit more of these things.
Yes.
Yes, it's been wonderful sharing, and I really feel very happy to have been invited and to be included in the session that we've just been sharing.
Yes. So we had, as I started off saying, we had 4 very eloquent, very interesting presentations that come together and give us a nice, holistic, rounded perspective of the Ramayana and the Ramayana tradition in Trinidad, especially. We have taken away, a number of salient ideas. The idea that the Ramayana is long enduring. It's been in India for so many, centuries. It was brought across the Kalapani to the Caribbean. And of course, in addition to being enduring, there is flexibility that allows it to be sustained and to endure in a new environment, an environment that was totally alien to Hinduism. So the fact that it's flexible, you have a tradition that has emerged that has not taken away from the text and the traditional text and so on, but has been able to develop different dimensions that reflect the location of the Ramayana. In Trinidad, Guyana has its own, Suriname would have its own, etc. So, the text is one open for interpretation, it's flexible, and I think that's apart from what it stands for in terms of its teachings, that many of which are universal. I remember interviewing one Pandit, and he told me he referred to the Ramayana as an encyclopedia. He says everything under the sun that you look for, you can find in the Ramayana. And I believe that I agree with him. You find, almost everything. There's a thought or an idea or a reference to so much. So I definitely do think that this session was, I would say long overdue. And I am really thankful that the UTT saw it fit to look at the Ramayana as in observance of Diwali. Both the Ramayana and Diwali, share that this overriding theme of good against evil and, light triumphing against darkness. And I definitely would urge UTT to convene more sessions similar to this, whether on the Ramayana, there's so much that can be said about it still, or on different aspects of Hinduism that we can engage, because from the questions and the discussion that came about, there are issues that need to be dealt with, from a Hindu perspective that, we probably just overlook, or we discuss it in small groups, internal workings and so on. So, definitely thank you, UTT, for convening the session and for asking me to be part of it. I feel very honored, and I look forward to many more sessions. Thank you all. Namaste.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, panelists, and have a good Diwali. And